I am sitting in my car outside the house that used to be my home, watching my husband David stack my belongings on the front porch. 3 years of marriage reduced to cardboard boxes and trash bags. The wedding photos we took in this very yard are probably in one of those boxes now, faces smiling back at a future that no longer exists. I destroyed everything when I went back to Jason. The man who once broke me physically and mentally became the reason I lost my baby, my marriage, and any shred of self-respect I had left. The biggest mistake of my life started with a simple Instagram message 2 months ago. Before we dive into how I lost everything that mattered, let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more real stories like this one. Now let me take you back to 2 months ago when my seemingly perfect life began to crumble. My name is Brooke, and until recently I thought I had everything figured out. At 28, I was married to the most patient-loving man I'd ever met. David and I had been together for 5 years, married for 3, living in our cozy little house in a quiet neighborhood outside Denver, Colorado. He worked as a software engineer for a local tech company, and I had a decent job at a small advertising firm downtown. We were not rich by any means, but we were happy, or at least I thought we were. David was everything Jason was not. Where Jason had been controlling and volatile, David was steady and supportive. When I met David 4 years after escaping my toxic relationship with Jason, I felt like I could finally breathe again. David never raised his voice, never made me feel small or stupid, never isolated me from my friends and family the way Jason had. He encouraged my career ambitions, celebrated my successes, and held me during the rough patches. I genuinely believed I had found my person. For 2 years, we had been trying to have a baby. Month after month, the pregnancy test came back negative. The fertility specialist said everything looked normal for both of us, that we just needed to be patient. David remained optimistic, always reassuring me that it would happen when the time was right. But I could see the disappointment in his eyes every time I got my period. The stress was starting to affect both of us, though we tried not to let it show. Around the same time, David's company went through layoffs, and his salary was cut by 15%. We were managing financially, but the pressure was building. David started working longer hours, trying to prove himself indispensable. I found myself spending more evenings alone scrolling through social media, feeling restless and unappreciated. That is when Jason reached out. The Instagram message appeared on a Tuesday evening in March. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. Jason Martinez. I had not heard from him in 5 years. Not since I finally found the strength to leave him and block him on everything. The message was simple. Hey Brooke, I know this is unexpected, but I have been thinking about you lately. I owe you a huge apology for how I treated you. I have changed a lot since then. Would you be willing to talk sometime? No pressure. My first instinct was to delete and block again. Jason had been my first serious relationship, lasting 3 tumultuous years from when I was 20 to 23. He had been charming initially, sweeping me off my feet with grand gestures and intense attention. But gradually, he became possessive, jealous, and controlling. He would monitor my phone demand to know where I was every minute and gradually isolated me from friends and family. The emotional abuse escalated to physical violence in the final months, and I finally left after he choked me during an argument about my going out with coworkers. But something about this message felt different. Maybe it was the fact that I was feeling neglected lately, or maybe I was just curious to see if people really could change. Against my better judgment, I found myself staring at the message for a long time that night. I did not respond immediately. I thought about it for 3 days, eventually deciding that hearing him out might provide some closure. I had never really processed that relationship properly, just buried it and moved on. Maybe talking to him would help me understand why I had stayed so long, why I had allowed myself to be treated that way. I finally responded. I appreciate the apology. I suppose we could talk, but I am married now and very happy. This would just be closure for both of us. His response came within minutes. Of course, I completely understand. I am so happy you found someone who treats you right. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime, just as old friends, nothing more. Against every logical thought in my head, I agreed to meet Jason for coffee. We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown far from my neighborhood and workplace. I told myself this was just about closure, about proving to myself that I had grown stronger and that he no longer had any power over me. When I walked into the cafe that Saturday afternoon, I almost did not recognize him. The Jason I remembered was always a bit rough around the edges, preferring ripped jeans and old band t-shirts. This Jason wore a crisp button-down shirt, clean jeans, and had obviously been working out. His hair was shorter, professional-looking. He stood up when he saw me, but did not try to hug or touch me, which I appreciated. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "I was not sure you would actually show up." We sat across from each other, and I was surprised by how calm and articulate he seemed. The Jason I knew had been impulsive, quick to anger, always interrupting. This Jason listened patiently as I updated him on my life, asking thoughtful questions about my career and interests. When I mentioned David, he smiled genuinely and said, "I am really glad you found someone who appreciates you the way you deserve." Then he began talking about his own journey. He told me about hitting rock bottom after I left, how he had realized he needed serious help. He had spent 2 years in therapy learning about his anger issues and the patterns of behavior he had learned from his own abusive father. He spoke about taking responsibility for his actions, understanding the damage he had caused, and working to become a better person. "I am not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I know I do not deserve that. I just wanted you to know that I recognize how terribly I treated you, and I am genuinely sorry. You deserve so much better than what I put you through." I found myself feeling vindicated in a way I had not expected. For years, I'd wondered if maybe I'd been too sensitive, if the relationship had not been as bad as I remembered. Hearing him acknowledge and take responsibility for his behavior felt healing in an unexpected way. We talked for 2 hours, and when we parted ways, I felt lighter somehow. Jason asked if we could stay in touch, just as friends, and I found myself saying yes. He promised he would never overstep boundaries, that he respected my marriage completely. That night, I felt guilty for not telling David about the meeting, but I convinced myself it was no big deal. Just coffee with an old friend who had apologized for past behavior, nothing more. Jason started texting me regularly, but his messages were innocent. He would send articles about advertising campaigns he thought I might find interesting, or ask for my opinion on career decisions he was making. He had started his own construction business and was doing well for himself. The conversations were engaging and intellectually stimulating in a way that I had been missing lately. David had been working 12-hour days for the past month, coming home exhausted and distracted. Our conversations had become limited to logistics, bills, household tasks, medical appointments. When I tried to share something exciting about work or ask about his day, he would give short responses before turning on the television or falling asleep on the couch. Jason's attention felt like a breath of fresh air. He remembered details about things I'd told him, asked follow-up questions about projects I was working on, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. I began looking forward to his messages each day. After 3 weeks of texting, Jason suggested we meet for lunch. "I know this great little place that serves amazing sandwiches," he said. "It would be nice to catch up in person again." I knew I should say no, but I was feeling lonely and unappreciated at home. David would never even notice if I was gone for an extra hour during my lunch break. I agreed to meet, but I did not tell David. When he asked about my day that evening, I mentioned having lunch with a colleague, which was not technically a lie since I had eaten lunch, just not with a colleague. The lunch was wonderful. Jason was attentive and charming, asking about my current projects and sharing stories about his business. He brought me a small bouquet of daisies, my favorite flowers, saying he had remembered how much I loved them. David had not brought me flowers in over a year. "You seem stressed," Jason observed. "Is everything okay at home?" I found myself opening up about the fertility struggles, David's long work hours, and how disconnected I had been feeling lately. Jason listened without judgment, offering support and understanding. "You deserve to feel valued and appreciated every single day," he said. "I hope David realizes how lucky he is." As we were leaving the restaurant, Jason gently touched my arm. "I had a really great time today," he said. "Would you maybe want to do this again next week?" I I should have said no. I should have recognized the dangerous territory I was entering. Instead, I heard myself saying yes. The second lunch led to a third, then a fourth. Each time, Jason was more attentive, more complimentary, more affectionate. He would touch my hand while talking, compliment my appearance, and make me feel beautiful and desirable in a way I had not felt in months. On our fifth lunch date, as we sat in his car afterward, Jason leaned over and kissed me. I should have pulled away, should have stopped this before it went any further. Instead, I kissed him back, feeling wanted and alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. That night, lying next to David as he snored softly, I felt sick with guilt. I had crossed a line I could never uncross, betrayed the trust of the one person who had loved me unconditionally. But I also could not stop thinking about how Jason had made me feel, how he had looked at me like I was the most important person in the world. The affair continued for 6 weeks, and during that time I became someone I did not recognize. I lied constantly, making up elaborate stories about where I was and who I was with. I deleted text messages, cleared my browser history, and lived in constant fear of being discovered. But I also felt more alive than I had in years. Jason was different than he had been in our previous relationship, at least initially. He was romantic and passionate, but he also seemed more stable and mature. He would surprise me with small gifts, write me sweet notes, and tell me constantly how beautiful and special I was. After months of feeling invisible in my own marriage, his attention was intoxicating. We would meet for lunch twice a week and text constantly throughout the day. Jason rented a small apartment across town, and we would sometimes meet there in the afternoons. I told David I was working late on client projects or meeting with potential new clients. He never questioned my stories, trusting me completely, which made the guilt even more overwhelming. But Jason was also becoming increasingly possessive. He wanted to know my schedule, every day, became jealous when I mentioned spending time with female friends, and started making comments about David that made me uncomfortable. "I do not understand how he can take you for granted," he would say. "If you were my wife, I would never let you out of my sight." 6 weeks into the affair, I realized I was late. My period, which had always been regular, was 5 days overdue. At first, I thought it was stress from all the lying and sneaking around, but when another week passed, I bought a pregnancy test. 2 pink lines stared back at me from the test strip. Pregnant. After 2 years of trying with David, I was finally pregnant, but I had no idea who the father was. I had been sleeping with both men during the same time period, and the timing made it impossible to determine paternity without testing. I sat on the bathroom floor of my office building and cried. This should have been the happiest moment of my life, but instead it was the most terrifying. If the baby was David's, he would be over the moon, and I would have to live with the knowledge that our child was conceived during the time I was betraying him. If the baby was Jason's, I would have to figure out how to explain that to everyone. That evening, I told David about the pregnancy, watching his face light up with pure joy. He swept me into his arms, spinning me around the kitchen, tears streaming down his face. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating. "We are finally going to have our baby." His happiness made my guilt almost unbearable, but I managed to smile and pretend to share his excitement. That night, he was more attentive and loving than he had been in months, talking about nursery colors and baby names until we fell asleep. The next day, I told Jason. His reaction was completely different than I had expected. Instead of joy or even concern, his face darkened with suspicion. "How do I know it is mine?" he demanded. "You have been sleeping with your husband this whole time, too." "I do not know whose it is," I admitted. "That is the problem." Jason's demeanor shifted instantly, and I caught a glimpse of the old Jason, the one I had been terrified of years ago. "You need to get a paternity test as soon as possible," he said coldly. "And if that baby is mine, you are going to leave David, and we are going to be a family." The possessiveness and control I remembered so well began creeping back into his behavior. He started calling and texting more frequently, demanding to know exactly where I was and what I was doing. When I did not respond immediately, he would become angry and accusatory. "You belong with me," he would say. "David does not love you the way I do. He does not understand you like I do." I began to realize that this new improved version of Jason had been a facade designed to draw me back in. Now that he thought he might have a claim on me through the baby, his true nature was re-emerging. The therapy and personal growth he had claimed were either fabricated or had not been as successful as he had led me to believe. At 8 weeks pregnant, I went to my first prenatal appointment with David. Seeing our baby on the ultrasound screen, hearing the rapid heartbeat should have been magical. David cried and held my hand, already planning how he would teach the baby to ride a bike and help with homework. I smiled and nodded, but inside I was dying with guilt and fear. Jason became increasingly aggressive about wanting to be involved in the pregnancy. He demanded to come to doctor's appointments, wanted to know every detail about my symptoms and the baby's development, and began talking about our future together as if it was inevitable. When I told him that I needed space to figure things out, he became angry in a way that reminded me why I had left him the first time. "You cannot keep my baby from me," he would say. "If you try to raise my child with another man, I will make your life hell. I will tell David everything, and then we will see who he chooses to believe." The stress of living a double life while pregnant was taking its toll. I was exhausted constantly, not just from pregnancy fatigue, but from the mental energy required to maintain my lies. David noticed I seemed anxious and distant, but I blamed it on pregnancy hormones and worry about being a good mother. At 10 weeks, Jason showed up at my office unannounced. "We need to talk," he said, and there was something in his voice that scared me. We went to a coffee shop down the street where he told me he had been doing research on paternity testing during pregnancy. "There is a blood test they can do at 9 weeks that will tell us for sure," he said. "I want you to get it done." "I am not ready for that yet," I replied. "I need more time to figure out what I'm going to do." Jason's eyes flashed with anger. "You do not get to decide this alone," he said. "That might be my child you are carrying, and I have rights." For the first time since our affair began, I was genuinely afraid of him again. The way he was looking at me, the tension in his body reminded me of the night he had choked me years ago. I made an excuse about needing to get back to work and left as quickly as possible. That night, I seriously considered telling David everything. I imagined how I would explain the affair, the pregnancy uncertainty, and Jason's increasingly threatening behavior. But every time I tried to find the words, I pictured David's face and knew I could not do it. He was so happy about the baby, so excited about becoming a father. How could I destroy that? At 11 weeks pregnant, everything fell apart in the most devastating way possible. David was scheduled to go to Seattle for a 3-day work conference, his first business trip since learning about the pregnancy. He was reluctant to leave me, but I assured him I would be fine and that it would be good for his career to make this presentation. The morning after David left, Jason called me at work. "I'm coming over tonight," he said. "We are going to settle this once and for all." "No," I said firmly. "I told you I need space to think." "You have had plenty of time to think," he replied. "I am tired of waiting while you play happy family with another man. If you will not make a decision, I will make it for you." Something in his tone terrified me. This was not the charming, reformed Jason who had won me back with flowers and sweet words. This was the Jason I remembered from our worst fights, the one who had hurt me both emotionally and physically. I left work early and went home hoping that being in my own space would make me feel safer. I considered calling David in Seattle, but what would I tell him? That my ex-boyfriend was threatening me. He would want to know why I was in contact with Jason at all, and the whole truth would come out. At 7 that evening, Jason showed up at my front door. I considered not answering, but I knew he would not just go away. When I opened the door, he pushed past me into the house without being invited. "We need to talk," he said, but his voice was cold and aggressive. "Jason, please just leave," I said. "David will be home soon." It was a lie. David was not coming back until Friday, but I hoped it might make Jason leave. "No, he will not," Jason said. "I know he is in Seattle until Friday. I have been watching this house, Brooke. I know your schedule better than you think." The fact that he had been stalking me sent chills down my spine. "You need to leave right now," I said, moving toward my phone. "I'm calling the police." Jason grabbed my wrist before I could reach the phone. "You are not calling anyone," he said. "We are going to figure this out right now. You are going to get that paternity test, And when it proves that baby is mine, you are going to leave David and come back to me where you belong. Let go of me, I said, trying to pull away from his grip. You are hurting me. I am barely touching you, he said, but his grip tightened. Stop being so dramatic. You always were too sensitive. Hearing those words, the same words he used to use to minimize his abuse years ago, triggered something in me. No, I said loudly. I am not doing this again. I am not going back to this. Let me go and get out of my house. Jason's face twisted with rage. You think you are too good for me now, he shouted. You think that weak husband of yours is better than me. I made you feel alive again. I reminded you what it was like to be desired, to be wanted. Without me, you are just another boring suburban housewife. Get out! I screamed, finally pulling free from his grip. That is when he snapped. Jason grabbed me by both arms and shook me violently. You do not get to dismiss me, he yelled. You do not get to use me and then throw me away. If I cannot have you, no one can. I tried to break free, but he was stronger than me, and pregnancy had made me feel more fragile and off balance. We struggled in the hallway, and I managed to scratch his face with my nails. This only made him angrier. You always were a fighter, he said, almost smiling. I liked that about you. Then he shoved me hard. I stumbled backward toward the staircase, trying to catch my balance, but I could not stop my momentum. I fell down 8 wooden steps, landing hard on my left side at the bottom. The pain was immediate and intense, radiating through my abdomen and back. I could taste blood in my mouth from where I had bitten my tongue, and my left wrist was already swelling. But worse than the physical pain was the cramping that started in my lower abdomen, the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Jason stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at me with an expression I could not read. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he walked down the steps, slowly stepping over me like I was an obstacle in his path. This is your fault, he said quietly. All you had to do was listen to me. All you had to do was choose me. Then he left, walking out the front door like nothing had happened, leaving me bleeding and in agony at the bottom of my own staircase. I managed to crawl to my phone and call 911. The paramedics found me conscious but in severe pain, bleeding vaginally and showing signs of internal injuries. The ambulance ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens, medical jargon, and overwhelming pain, both physical and emotional. At the hospital, the emergency room doctor confirmed what I already knew. I am sorry, she said gently. You have lost the baby. The trauma from the fall caused a complete miscarriage. There was nothing we could have done to prevent it. I called David from my hospital bed, sobbing so hard I could barely speak. The baby, I managed to say. I lost the baby. He was on the first flight back to Denver, but those hours alone in the hospital were the longest of my life. The physical pain from the fall was manageable with medication, but the emotional pain was unbearable. I had lost my baby, and it was my fault for letting Jason back into my life, for creating the situation that led to this moment. When David arrived at the hospital 12 hours later, his face was devastated but full of love and concern for me. What happened? He asked, holding my hand gently. The doctors said you fell down the stairs. This was my moment to tell him the truth, to come clean about everything. But looking at his worried, loving face, I could not find the words. Instead, I found myself telling a partial truth. Jason came to the house, my ex-boyfriend. He wanted to talk, and things got heated, and I fell. David's expression changed immediately. Your ex-boyfriend, Brooke, what was your ex-boyfriend doing at our house? Why was he there? The pain medication and emotional exhaustion made it impossible to maintain my lies any longer. Everything came spilling out: the Instagram message, the coffee dates, the lunches, the affair, the uncertainty about the baby's paternity, Jason's increasing aggression and possessiveness. I told him about the threats, the stalking, and finally about the fight that led to me falling down the stairs. David's face went through a series of emotions as I spoke: confusion, disbelief, hurt, anger, and finally a cold emptiness that was worse than any of the others. When I finished talking, he sat in silence for a long time. So you do not know if the baby was mine? He said finally, his voice flat and emotionless. No, I whispered. I do not know. And you have been lying to me for 2 months. Yes. David stood up slowly, his movements mechanical and distant. I cannot do this, he said. I cannot be here right now. David, please, I begged. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I love you. We can work through this. He turned to look at me one last time, and the pain in his eyes was devastating. You cheated on me with the man who used to abuse you. You put yourself and our potential child in danger for someone who hurt you before and hurt you again. I do not understand any of this, Brooke. I do not understand how the woman I married could do this. Then he left. He walked out of that hospital room, and I knew with absolute certainty that my marriage was over. I had lost my baby and my husband in the same day, and both losses were entirely my fault. The divorce papers were served to me 2 weeks after I was released from the hospital. David had moved out of our house and was staying with his brother while I recovered from my physical injuries. He never came back to the house while I was there, communicating only through his lawyer about the logistics of ending our marriage. I was fired from my job 3 days after returning to work. My supervisor said my recent performance had been inconsistent and unprofessional, and given the gossip circulating about my personal situation, they felt it was best to part ways. News traveled fast in our small community, and everyone seemed to know about the affair and the circumstances surrounding my miscarriage. Jason never contacted me again after that night. He disappeared from social media and changed his phone number. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had moved to another state, starting over somewhere fresh. He left without any consequences for what he had done to me, while I was left to deal with the wreckage he had helped create. My sister Sarah was the only person who stood by me during those dark months. She let me move into her spare room and held me while I cried myself to sleep, night after night. She drove me to therapy appointments and made sure I ate when I had no appetite for anything. She never judged me for my mistakes, but she also did not make excuses for them. You made choices that hurt people, she told me one evening as we sat on her couch drinking tea. Bad choices, but that does not mean you deserve to be hurt in return. What Jason did to you was assault, Brooke. You need to report it. 3 months after the incident, I finally found the courage to file a police report against Jason. The detective was kind but realistic about the challenges of the case. With no witnesses and Jason having left the state, and with the complicating factor of our affair, building a case would be difficult. They took my statement and opened a file, but no charges were ever filed. Still, having the incident officially documented felt important. It validated what had happened to me and created a record in case Jason ever tried to contact me or hurt someone else in the future. With Sarah's encouragement, I started seeing a therapist who specialized in domestic violence and trauma. Dr. Martinez helped me understand the patterns of abuse I had experienced with Jason, both in our original relationship and in our recent affair. She explained how abusers often present a false reformed persona to draw their victims back in, only to return to their abusive behaviors once they feel secure in their control again. You were not stupid for believing he had changed, she told me. You were hopeful, and there is nothing wrong with that. But you also ignored warning signs because you were vulnerable and seeking validation. Part of healing is learning to recognize those warning signs and developing healthier ways to meet your emotional needs. The therapy helped me understand that while Jason's violence was never acceptable, I also needed to take responsibility for the choices I had made. I had betrayed David's trust, lied repeatedly, and put myself in dangerous situations despite knowing Jason's history. I could not blame everything on Jason's manipulation, even though that manipulation was real. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I made the decision to leave Denver and start fresh in Portland, Oregon. I had found a position with a larger advertising agency, and the distance from all the memories and gossip felt necessary for my healing. Before I left, I wrote David a letter. I did not expect a response, and I did not get one, but I needed him to know how sorry I was for the pain I had caused him. I wanted him to know that our good years together were real, that my love for him had been genuine, even though my actions had not reflected that. I wished him happiness and healing, knowing I had no right to wish for anything from him. In Portland, I slowly began to rebuild my life. I threw myself into my work, finding purpose in creating campaigns that helped small businesses tell their stories. I joined a support group for women who had experienced domestic violence and eventually began volunteering with organizations that helped other survivors. A year and a half after losing everything, I started dating again. Marcus was patient and kind a teacher who understood trauma and never pushed me to move faster than I was comfortable with. Our relationship developed, slowly built on honest communication and mutual respect, rather than the intense passion and drama I had mistaken for love in the past. I learned to recognize the difference between healthy attention and manipulative love bombing, between genuine care and possessive control. I developed boundaries I had never had before and learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. Through therapy and time, I came to understand that my affair with Jason was not really about him at all. It was about my own insecurities, my fear of being overlooked and unimportant, and my tendency to seek external validation rather than developing internal self-worth. Jason had preyed on those vulnerabilities, but they had existed before he came back into my life. David remarried 2 years after our divorce. I heard about it through mutual friends and felt genuinely happy for him, even though it hurt to know he had found love again while I was still rebuilding. His new wife was a teacher, someone who apparently appreciated his steady kindness in a way I'd failed to do. I never tried to contact him or insert myself into his new life. The least I could do was let him move forward without reminders of the pain I had caused him. Sometimes I wondered if he ever thought about the good times we shared, but mostly I hoped he did not think about me at all. 5 years have passed since that terrible night when I lost my baby and my marriage. I still live in Portland, still work in advertising, and still volunteer with domestic violence organizations. Marcus and I are engaged now, planning a small wedding next spring. I am pregnant again 4 months along, and this time the joy is untainted by deception or uncertainty. I have learned to forgive myself for my mistakes while still taking full responsibility for them. I destroyed my first marriage through my own choices, and nothing can change that. But I also survived domestic violence twice, escaped a dangerous situation, and rebuilt my life from nothing. Both things can be true at the same time. The baby we lost would have been 5 years old now. I think about that child sometimes, wondering who they would have looked like, what their personality would have been like. I have had to make peace with never knowing if that baby was David's or Jason's, and with the knowledge that my choices led to their loss. But I have also had to make peace with the fact that I cannot change the past. I can only choose how to move forward, how to love better, how to be honest even when honesty is painful. I can choose to use my experience to help other women recognize dangerous relationships and find the strength to leave them. Every morning when I wake up next to Marcus, I am grateful for the second chance I almost did not deserve. I am grateful for a love built on truth rather than lies, for a partner who sees my flaws and chooses to love me anyway, for the opportunity to become the person I should have been all along. Sometimes people ask me if I regret everything that happened, if I wish I had never answered Jason's message that day. It is a complicated question because while I would never want to go through that pain again, and I would never want to cause David that kind of hurt, those experiences taught me who I really was and who I wanted to become. I learned that I am stronger than I thought, more resilient than I knew, and capable of change even when change feels impossible. I learned that love without respect is not love at all, and that passion without trust will always end in destruction. Most importantly, I learned that we are all capable of both terrible mistakes and genuine redemption, sometimes within the same lifetime. The woman sitting in that car outside her former home 5 years ago, watching her life reduced to cardboard boxes, thought her story was ending. What she did not know was that sometimes we have to lose everything to find out who we really are underneath all our mistakes. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the catalyst for becoming our best selves. That realization does not erase the pain I caused or excuse the choices I made, but it does give meaning to the suffering. And sometimes meaning is enough to help us keep going until we find our way back to hope. What do you think about Brooke's journey from betrayal to redemption? Have you ever had to rebuild your life after making devastating mistakes? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to like this video and subscribe for more real stories of resilience and recovery. If you know someone who might benefit from hearing this story, please share it with them. Thank you for listening, and remember that no matter how far you fall, you always have the power to choose how you get back up.